It's probably safe to say that chapter 8, the title of it, lets us know what's coming. And the title being The Character of Generalizations in Social Science and Their Lack of Predictive Power. It's not too hard to figure out that MacIntyre here is going to express his strong doubts and reservations about this Enlightenment project of managerial expertise, which he's basically said, that this is a fiction. So laws governing human behavior, these have largely turned out to be false. It just doesn't seem to work. And so the big systems that people have constructed, largely in MacIntyre's view, have not worked. And but he doesn't say that social science is useless. He's not putting that forward that strong of a thesis. He says that there is something there, but we should really rethink again. Concepts have changed their meaning. Remember in the previous video I talked about the change in the notion of fact as you move from an Aristotelian purpose-driven, future-driven universe to that of a mechanical, antecedent causality-driven universe. The concept of fact changes, and it changes in an important way vis-a-vis its relationship to value. If you remember those little Venn diagrams in the purpose-ridden or riddled universe, if you like, there was a definite link with fact and value, and that became separated under the mechanical view. So the achievements of social science have been concealed from us, and he thinks there's been a systematic misinterpretation. Now, this is a fairly complicated discussion. Once again, I'm simplifying it. But in the Enlightenment view of explanation, to explain something is, to explain X, whatever X may be, is to be able to predict things about X. So to explain human behavior means you predict it. And that is a very kind of basically a control thing. Is to understand is to predict. It's to basically kind of rule over it. To understand is to manipulate. And you can look in lots of the romantics in poetry is and their concern over understanding being a form of destruction, right? You're constantly murdering and dissecting things in order to achieve an understanding. To achieve an understanding, you got to break it. You got to manipulate it. That's not an Aristotelian view, right? It was very much more of a neutral observation. And although I haven't covered in this, the scientific revolution was, not as much on observation as people think, but as Bacon and the early thinkers were articulating the scientific approach, it was manipulation, right? Isolation, twisting, changing, manipulating, and whatnot. And again, where do you see scientists? You don't see them out in the world looking around. They're in laboratories manipulating and transforming things. So so MacIntyre wants to pick up on a bit of a different relationship between explaining and prediction. And namely, he goes to Machiavelli in his concept of fortuna. Now, fortuna has a variety of interpretations. There's a traditional view, and then there's the Machiavellian view. The traditional view, of course, and very roughly, was Fortuna was a rather benign but kind of disruptive and fickle goddess, bringing a little disorder here and there, and perhaps making life a little bit interesting by breaking it up a little. And of course, this could have good results and sometimes evil results as well. Machiavelli's Fortuna, which if you want to look it up, perhaps he discussed it in a variety of places, but perhaps chapter 25 of The Prince might be arguably the most famous place that he discusses it. It's a little bit more malevolent, right? It's fixed. It's not quite so fickle and so lighthearted and just putting a little disruption in here and there. It's a source. Fortuna is more of a source of misery and catastrophe. If Fortuna gets you, has you in mind, you're in trouble. There's not a lot you can do. If it's out to get you or thwart you, you're in deep trouble, to say the least. There's some pretty rough and flat out sexist imagery that Machiavelli uses regarding how men are to struggle with Fortuna. MacIntyre doesn't take all this imagery, of course, but he argues that there just simply are more than we'd like to admit. And this, of course, goes way back to the ancients as well. There's a sort of a fundamental absurdity, right? And bigger than just this, very specific quantum indeterminacy. That it's much larger. There's this unpredictability in human affairs, and there's a number of them. And he articulates. You can have a look and in detail in the chapter for all the details. But there's just you just can't have that Enlightenment project. Again, MacIntyre is not critiquing the Enlightenment like objectivity was bad or logic was bad. No, he's critiquing it more of its general program that you could have this highly organized society, right? That's the Enlightenment project of trying to ground tradition, morality in a non-teleological structure and free of tradition and free of religion. That's where he thinks that Kant and the gang went off the rails. And remember, Kant was very leery of jettisoning teleology from the world of our thought, right? He thought that would be problematic and morality would be in trouble. Anyways, so what's the upshot? So when you think about this, okay, so if you can understand, but there's understanding something, but doesn't mean you can manipulate it, right? You can understand your friends, but you wouldn't say you manipulate them. So the notion of understanding and explaining and all that is going to be trying to separate it from control and manipulation. In this sense, MacIntyre says, well, what's the upshot of all of this? Well, it goes on like this. This project of creating a wholly or largely predictable society is fundamentally doomed, right? And of course, we can see that he adumbrated that in a previous chapter, about the rise of the manager and the social reformer, and they're going to do all this and have all these results. It's highly unlikely that this is largely not going to work. So, and from this doomed project, again, this Enlightenment doomed project, that you could have these, model societies, machine-like societies. You get this other one, which is this concept of managerial efficiency. So even the notions of efficiency, he thinks they have a fictional aspect to them. This is another moral fiction. And in a previous chapter, MacIntyre, listed a number of things that he regarded, ultimately were taken as true within this Enlightenment project, but have turned out to be largely fictional. He's not denying, though, like, again, MacIntyre's not denying that some managers, bureaucrats have specialized knowledge. He's not a skeptic like that and saying that there's no such thing as a good manager. Not at all. And he's not saying that it's not the case that a good manager can't come in and help organize things and get positive effects. He's not saying that just anybody can do it or nobody can do it. It's not that radical by any means. But this notion of expertise coming in and instantiating social control, right? He thinks that this is largely a fiction. And why does he think that's largely a fiction? Well, at the end of the day, he thinks that this notion of social control is just simply beyond anyone or any organization's control. It too is a kind of fiction. So in that sense, that these big generalizations in social science, they've largely been a failure. So the whole project has come full, with his discussion, his thought of the whole project, it ultimately was a failure. But again, MacIntyre is not saying things like objectivity and science and all that are bad or whatever. He's just saying that basic Enlightenment project of trying to rationally ground something like morality, like have this in a secular society that's public, that everybody agreed on, largely failed. Philosophy retreats and becomes this emotivism. Emotivism, though, sort of gets out into the drinking water and becomes the software, to mix my metaphors, becomes the software running in the background. And we get these endless disagreements. And it's not because emotivism is the correct theory, which says, well, it's part of the essence of morality. to have disagreements. MacIntyre says, no, that's not the case. We've had a breakdown in morality, and morality has kind of exploded, and we don't have it anymore. So he wants to go back earlier and to traditions that are pre-Enlightenment. So he's going to look at that in the chapters to come, because remember, MacIntyre doesn't want to just give us a description or a diagnosis of the problem. We've seen that, okay? Now it's time to shift to what is his prescription. If he's right and morality has basically exploded, we don't have these kinds of generalizations, the whole Enlightenment project has, not completely, but in certain respect, morality has largely failed. The time is for MacIntyre to now tell us, what can we do? Like, where do we go from here? And that will be the subject of future videos.